You're dieting, but you're just not losing weight. What's going on? You've read all these articles, you know fancy terms like caloric deficit and total daily energy expenditure. You know what macronutrients are, micronutrients, but you're just not losing weight. Well, I'm a coach, I work with people and I help to get them ripped and lean. And I notice 3 common issues when people just can't seem to lose weight. The first one is probably the biggest. It's just that people aren't tracking. So when I say tracking, I mean tracking your caloric intake, the macronutrient profile of the foods you're eating, the proteins, the fats, and the carbs. And the reason why we track is we want to make sure that you're actually in a caloric deficit, that you're below your maintenance level of calories. So you have to figure out what your maintenance calories are and then eat foods that are underneath that level. And a lot of times people just don't want to do that. They'll do things like cut out certain foods or restrict their feeding window. Maybe they'll do paleo and intermittent fasting. These strategies can work. They're totally valid in theory, but when they work, it's because they create a caloric deficit. And so they may not work for you because it's possible that when you go paleo, you're still at or above maintenance. Maybe you're fasting 2 days a week, but on those days where you eat so much that you're at or above maintenance. The way to solve this problem, the way to make sure you're in a deficit is to track your calories. It's the simplest, best, and most important thing you can do to make sure you're actually in a deficit. Secondly, there are people who track, but they don't do a very good job at it. And I understand that because tracking is hard and tedious, and there can be lots of issues with it. So for example, you might think you're tracking correctly, but you're actually not paying attention to the things you're eating. Maybe you think you're eating chicken breast, but it's chicken thigh, which has way more fat. Maybe you think you're having 0-calorie or low-fat sauces, but they actually have calories in them. Maybe you're just forgetting to track certain meals or certain parts of meals. You have a snack in the middle of the day and you forget to track it. Or maybe instead of measuring the foods you're eating, you're eyeballing those portions, and so your tracking is off. Or perhaps you just eat out too frequently and it's just too hard and too difficult to track precisely. These are all legitimate issues I understand completely. The best way to solve all of this is just to have a little bit less variety in your diet. If you eat the same foods most of the time, it becomes much easier to track those foods. If you eat the same foods in the same quantities most of the time, it becomes much easier to track those foods. I'm not saying to make your diet overly restrictive. I'm not saying to cut out all kinds of food groups, but I am saying that if you can limit your choices, it makes it much easier to track. It'll remove that mental burden. It'll make things more accurate because you just have fewer decisions to make, fewer variables to track. And so that's the simplest thing to do. For me personally, I kind of live like a robot and I eat mostly the same foods all the time. Again, you don't have to go that extreme, but the more variety you have in your diet, the harder it is to track. And if you're new to dieting, you want to make it simple and easy. You want that burden to feel light. And so the best way to do that is to limit those food choices. Lastly, the biggest problem that I see with dieters, the biggest obstacle that they face, is that they'll adhere to their plan, they'll track, they'll do everything right, and then they'll just go off plan. This often happens on the weekends or for social engagements or maybe on a day when they're just feeling super stressed and tired. This is totally natural. I get it. Stress is a real thing. It's hard to diet. Dieting is exhausting. It sucks to be hungry. It makes you irritable and cranky. And food for a lot of people can be very comforting. And particularly if you just want to go out and have fun and distract yourself from the misery of your life or your job, food is there for you. I understand this completely. But these kinds of habits, these kinds of coping mechanisms aren't going to help you. If you keep going off plan, if you keep cheating, you won't lose weight. And what's worse is you might develop this kind of yo-yo seesaw relationship with food where you diet really strictly, adhere, and then binge, and then go back to being strict, and then binge, and then go back to being strict. And not only do you fail to lose weight, and you actually kind of mess with your own psychology, and maybe even develop some kind of a disordered eating habit. In situations like this, when a client just keeps going off plan, we have to think and talk about what motivates them. What's driving them to diet? What's driving them to want to change themselves? And what's in the way? I think you really have to ask yourself, why do I care about this thing? Why do I want to change myself? What's important to me? And why am I letting these other decisions get in the way of my goals? I can't answer that for you personally, but I can tell you that if you never actually diet, if you never actually adhere to a plan, you absolutely, positively won't lose weight. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Appreciate you.